Founder Suge Knight had a lot to say about the Tupac Shakur murder trial during a jailhouse interview with TMZ. Knight was in the car with Tupac the night he was shot on the Strip in September of 1996.
This convicted killer is sitting inside a California prison cell right now, and he just said something from behind bars that has made both sides of a murder trial terrified. He was the driver. He took shrapnel to the skull. He held his dying friend on the Las Vegas Strip while 2 tires blew out beneath them. For 30 years, he refused to say a single word. And now, days before the only trial ever connected to Tupac Shakur's assassination, Suge Knight finally opened his mouth. And what came out was not a confession. It was a threat. The warning from behind bars. We all assumed Suge Knight would stay quiet forever. He had every reason to. He is 61 years old, locked inside the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility near San Diego, serving a 28-year sentence for running over and killing a man named Terry Carter in a Compton parking lot back in 2015. He will not see the outside of a prison until he is well into his 70s, if he survives that long. He has nothing left to gain from talking and everything left to lose. But in the first week of August 2026, Knight picked up the phone and gave an interview to ABC News that sent shockwaves through the Las Vegas courtroom, where jury selection was about to begin in the murder trial of Dwayne "Kef" D. Davis, the former Southside Compton Crips gang leader charged with orchestrating the 1996 drive-by shooting that killed Tupac Shakur. And if you were expecting Knight to finally cooperate after all these years, you need to understand who this man really is. This trial has nothing to do with me, Knight told ABC News. And if somebody brings me there, it's going to hurt whoever brings me there. I promise you that. That is not the language of a reluctant witness. That is the language of a man who has decided that his silence is a weapon, and he is more than willing to use it against anyone who tries to force his hand. Knight is listed as a possible prosecution witness in the Davis trial. If subpoenaed, he would be legally required to appear. But getting Suge Knight to sit in a witness chair and getting him to actually say something useful are 2 completely different things, and everybody involved in this case knows it. Knight is not just some bystander who happened to see something. He is the only living eyewitness to Tupac Shakur's murder. He was driving the BMW. He was sitting less than 2 feet away when 13 rounds tore through the passenger side of that car. He watched Tupac get hit 4 times in the chest, arm, and thigh. He made a U-turn on blown-out tires and raced toward Las Vegas Boulevard with a dying man next to him. And for 3 decades, through police interviews, grand jury proceedings, documentaries, podcasts, and now a full-blown murder trial, he has refused to tell anyone what he saw. Not because he does not remember, because he believes that talking is worse than killing. To actually get on the stand and point somebody out, it's worse than taking a gun and shooting that man in the head, Knight said. Because if you shoot a person in the head, they die once. If you get on the stand and you snitch on that person, they die 1,000,000 times. But his silence about the shooter is not the same as silence about everything else, because in the same interview, Knight aimed his words at someone far more powerful than Kef D. Davis, and the name he kept circling back to is one that has haunted this case since the very beginning. The night everything fell apart. September 7th, 1996, was supposed to be a celebration. Las Vegas was electric. Mike Tyson was fighting Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand, and every major player from the worlds of music, entertainment, and the streets had flown in to watch. Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight had ringside seats. Tyson knocked Seldon out in the first round. The crowd erupted, and then the real trouble started. If you have followed this story over the years, you know the broad strokes of what happened next, but what most people still do not know are the smaller details that turned a fistfight into a death sentence. As thousands of people poured through the MGM Grand lobby after the fight, a Death Row Records associate named Trayvon Lane spotted someone he recognized. It was Orlando "Baby" Lane Anderson, a 21-year-old Southside Compton Crip. Months earlier, in July of that year, Anderson and a group of Crips had attacked Lane at the Lakewood Mall in Los Angeles and stolen his Death Row Records pendant, a gold chain that carried enormous weight in that world. Stealing a Death Row medallion was not just a robbery. It was a statement. It was a provocation designed to humiliate one of the most dangerous organizations in hip-hop. Lane pointed Anderson out to Tupac, and within seconds, Tupac sprinted toward him and threw the first punch. Knight and several Death Row associates joined in. The beating was captured on MGM Grand security cameras. footage that would be replayed on every news channel in the country for weeks. What almost nobody talks about is what happened inside Tupac's head after that fight. According to Knight's exclusive interview with People magazine in July 2025, Tupac was terrified that the security footage would be used to send him back to prison. He had only been free since October of 1995, when Knight posted bail for him while he appealed a sexual assault conviction he always denied. Tupac knew that being caught on camera assaulting someone could violate his parole. And according to Knight, Tupac said something that night that still echoes 3 decades later. "I'll die before I go back." He went back to the Luxor Hotel, changed his clothes, and got into a black BMW 750iL with Knight behind the wheel. They were heading to Club 662, a night spot Knight owned on East Flamingo Road, where Tupac was scheduled to appear at a charity event. A convoy of death row vehicles trailed behind them. Tupac was hanging out of the sunroof. Fans were chasing the car, and for a brief window that night, it looked like the fight at the MGM was already behind them. Then a white Cadillac pulled up alongside the BMW at a red light at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane. And everything about hip-hop, about music, about an entire generation's relationship to a man who rapped about death like he already knew it was coming, changed forever in the span of 6 seconds. But the 4 men inside that white Cadillac did not just show up at that intersection by accident, and the story of how they got there reveals a chain of decisions, a chain of money, and a chain of revenge that leads back to a name no one in the music industry wanted to say out loud. The man who could not stop talking. Every cold case has a moment where it breaks open. In most cases, it is a piece of physical evidence. A fingerprint, a DNA match, or a surveillance angle nobody checked. In the murder of Tupac Shakur, there was none of that. No murder weapon was ever recovered. The white Cadillac was never found. The man widely believed to have pulled the trigger, Orlando Anderson, was shot dead in a separate gang incident in Compton in May of 1998. He was 23 years old. For decades, this case seemed destined to remain unsolved. And it would have, if not for one man's inability to keep his mouth shut. Dwayne "Kef D. Davis, Anderson's uncle and a former shot caller for the Southside Compton Crips, did something no defense attorney on earth could have anticipated. He spent 20 years publicly confessing to his role in the murder across every medium available to him. He gave police interviews. He appeared on A&E, USA Network, Fox, and BET. He sat for a docuseries called Death Row Chronicles in 2018, where he described the night of the shooting in disturbing detail, telling the cameras that the fatal shots came from the back seat of the Cadillac. "Going to keep it for the code of the streets," he said on camera. "It just came from the back seat, bro." And then, in 2019, he published a memoir called Compton Street Legend with a tagline that read, "The last living eyewitness to Tupac's murder is telling his story." In that book, Davis described obtaining the .40 caliber Glock used in the shooting, riding in the white Cadillac, and being present when the shots were fired. He even described what he was wearing, a Ray Luca Crime Story suit, and prosecutors later found a Polaroid photograph of Davis in that exact outfit. On September 29, 2023, Las Vegas police arrested Davis at his home in the suburb of Henderson. He had been living a quiet retirement. He played golf. He had grandchildren, and he genuinely believed no one could touch him. But the proffer agreement he relied on was made with a joint federal and Los Angeles task force investigating the murder of Notorious B.I.G., not with Nevada authorities. Las Vegas prosecutors argued they were never bound by that deal, and a judge agreed. Davis now sits in a Las Vegas jail cell, charged with murder with the use of a deadly weapon. He has pleaded not guilty. He refused a plea deal. And the defense he is running with in 2026 might be the most audacious gambit in modern legal history, because he is now claiming he was never even in Las Vegas on the night Tupac was killed. The problem is that hotel receipts discovered by investigators show a room at the Monte Carlo booked under the name of Davis's wife, Paula Clemens, on September 7, 1996, and a room at the Excalibur booked under Orlando Anderson's name on the same night. But the most damaging evidence against Davis did not come from investigators or hotel records, and it was delivered in a 7-minute phone call that Davis himself made from a jailhouse phone just days after his arrest. The phone call that destroyed everything. Every jailhouse phone call is recorded. Every inmate knows this. There are signs posted next to the phones. There are automated messages that play before each call. And yet, in the days following his September 2023 arrest, Kefty Davis picked up the phone, called a woman identified as his mistress, a woman who addressed him as her husband despite his legal marriage to someone else, and when she asked him about the memoir, his response was immediate. "Oh yeah, I did." 4 words. That is all it took to collapse the entire foundation of his defense. For months, Davis and his legal team had been building their case around a single argument: that Compton Street legend was fiction, ghostwritten entirely by co-author Yusuf Jah, and that Davis had never even read the book. In a March 2025 jailhouse interview with ABC News, Davis said it himself. "I've never read the book. I just gave him details of my life, and he went and did his little investigation and wrote the book on his own." But the phone call told a different story, and Judge Carly Kearney ruled the memoir admissible as evidence, noting that Davis made multiple public statements calling the book the real truth. Prosecutors plan to play that 7-minute recording during the trial, which is expected to last 4 weeks. And if you were sitting there thinking that Davis might still find a way out of this, consider what Suge Knight said about that defense from his prison cell. If that's his defense, he might as well go out with a bang and walking in, sock his lawyer right in the face because you already put yourself there. Knight compared Davis to a man falling off a cliff, grabbing at flowers and twigs, knowing nothing will hold him, knowing it's not going to hold them up, and that's what he's doing. But the phone call and the memoir are not even the most explosive part of this case, because in his 2008 proffer session with federal investigators, Davis dropped a name that has loomed over this murder for 3 decades, a name that appeared 77 times in the Clark County District Attorney's July 2024 court filings. The $1 million bounty. Sean Diddy Combs. That is the name Kefty Davis gave investigators when they asked who bankrolled the hit. According to a 2025 DEA document obtained by USA Today, Davis alleged that Combs offered a $1 million bounty on the heads of both Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. Davis told investigators that Combs said something to the effect of, he would give anything for those dudes' heads, and that he made this statement openly in front of as many as 45 people. Combs has always denied any involvement. Las Vegas police have confirmed that he has never been considered a suspect or charged in connection with the murder. But that has not stopped the allegations from growing louder with each passing year, especially from Suge Knight. From prison, Knight has been relentless on this point. In his People magazine interview, he said, "I end up with a bullet an inch into my skull, but at the same time, everybody knows where $1 million came from. Like, what would Pac want? What he really wants is truth." On the PBD podcast in April 2024, Knight pointed toward Combs again, calling him an FBI informant and suggesting the music industry had known for years. Diddy's former bodyguard Gene Deal has publicly urged federal agents to follow the money, alleging the $1 million may have been routed through an associate named Eric Von Zip Martin. In previously unreleased audio from 2008 that surfaced in August 2024, Davis himself revealed that he attempted to collect the $1 million from Combs after the murder, but was betrayed by Martin, who allegedly disappeared with the money. Tupac's family has hired a New York-based attorney to explore these connections. And while Combs has never been charged, his name now sits like a shadow over every corner of this trial. Suge Knight's refusal to testify is not cowardice. It is conviction. Whether you respect it or despise it, you have to understand that the code Knight lives by is older than hip-hop, older than Death Row Records, and older than anything that happened on that Las Vegas intersection in 1996. In the streets of Compton where Knight grew up, cooperation with law enforcement is treated as the ultimate act of betrayal. Knight tied his own hands with his own philosophy in that ABC News interview. "My loyalty to Tupac can never be compromised," he said. "Me as a man, what I believe in, can't be compromised. I'm not there to help him, and I'm damn not there to hurt him." And you can feel the impossible contradiction in every word. He loves Tupac. He says he thinks about him every single day. He watched him bleed out in the passenger seat of his own car. And yet he will not walk into a courtroom and do the one thing that could deliver some measure of accountability for that death, because doing so would make him something he considers worse than a murderer. "He kept talking until they put handcuffs on him," Knight said of Davis. "Everything he said and talked about, he already told on himself." That last line is the closest thing to a verdict Suge Knight will ever deliver. He believes Davis is guilty, but he believes the system should convict Davis on Davis's own words, not his. The prosecution has no murder weapon, no white Cadillac, no surviving co-conspirators willing to testify, and no cooperation from the only living eyewitness. Their case rests largely on a defendant who spent 2 decades making statements about the killing before later claiming some of them were fiction. He's in everybody's mind. The trial of Kef D. Davis will be one of the most unusual murder cases in American legal history. A man is being prosecuted almost entirely on his own words. The physical evidence does not exist. The star witness refuses to cooperate. And the defendant's defense strategy requires a jury to believe that a man who spent 20 years putting himself at the scene of one of the most famous murders in the world was lying every single time. But for anyone who grew up listening to Tupac, for anyone who remembers where they were on September 13, 1996, when the news broke that he was gone, this trial is about something much bigger than Kef D. Davis. Suge Knight, the man at the center of all of it, ended his ABC News interview by talking about his youngest son, a 16-year-old named Legend who plays basketball and writes rap music. His favorite rapper is Tupac, Knight said. His friend's favorite rapper is Tupac. So this younger generation still believes and loves Tupac, my own son. And then he said something that will stay with anyone who has ever loved an artist the way people love Tupac. Tupac is not here. Well, I wouldn't say he's not here because he's in everybody's mind, and the people who knew him, he's in their heart. Drop a comment and tell us what you think about this case and whether you believe the full truth has finally come out or if the biggest name in this story is still being protected. We want to hear your thoughts. There are still questions that remain unanswered. And perhaps the biggest one is whether Suge Knight knows more than he has ever admitted publicly. After 30 years of silence, his recent comments have reopened old wounds and raised new questions about what really happened that night in Las Vegas. While Knight continues to insist that his loyalty to Tupac prevents him from becoming a witness against anyone, his words suggest that he has never stopped thinking about the shooting, the people involved, and the events that led to Tupac's death. For the prosecution, Knight could potentially provide details that no other living person can confirm. For the defense, his refusal to testify means the jury may never hear the story directly from the man who was sitting beside Tupac when the bullets came through the BMW. And for Tupac's fans, the case remains a painful reminder that one of the most famous murders in music history still carries unanswered questions. As the trial moves forward, every statement, every recording, and every piece of evidence will be examined under a microscope. But one thing remains certain. Suge Knight has finally spoken again, and his decision to speak without revealing everything may be just as significant as anything he could have said from the witness stand. The question now is whether the truth will finally emerge from the courtroom, or whether another chapter of Tupac Shakur's story will end with more questions than answers. The world has waited nearly 30 years for answers, and now the trial has created a new opportunity to examine the evidence, the accusations, and the statements that have surrounded Tupac Shakur's death since that September night in 1996. But even with the courtroom finally examining the case, there are still mysteries that may never be solved. Suge Knight remains the person closest to Tupac during the shooting, yet he continues to hold back the details he believes should remain unspoken. Dwayne Kef D. Davis, meanwhile, faces the consequences of years of public statements that prosecutors say connect him directly to the murder. Whether those statements are enough to convince a jury remains to be seen. For Tupac's family, friends, and millions of fans around the world, this is more than another criminal case. It is the possibility of finally understanding what happened to an artist whose influence has continued to grow long after his death. Tupac's music continues to inspire new generations. His words continue to be quoted, and his story continues to raise questions about loyalty, revenge, fame, and violence. Now, with the trial underway, the world is watching to see whether the courtroom can finally provide the answers that decades of investigations failed to deliver.